mine is on the other side of that ridge over there, about 30 kilometres away.
So what sort of area are we talking about?
Oh, it'd have to be thousands of square miles.
Thousands of square miles with the underground water affected?
Yes.
You can't live without food and water. If there's no water, there's no life. There's no food, there's no life. You can't eat coal.
The Adani Group's track record on environmental management within the country leaves a lot to be desired.
Here's a business conglomerate who will not stop at anything to maximize its profits.
To sit back and let someone that's got such a destructive environmental record free access to that international icon is just inconceivable. How could anyone in my generation stand up with any degree of pride and accept that? You know, we should be ashamed.
Welcome to Four Corners. Few developments in Australia have aroused such passion as the proposal by the Indian corporate colossus Adani to build a giant coal mine in Queensland's Galilee Basin. The federal and Queensland governments say the project, the world's biggest export coal mine, will provide thousands of jobs and a huge boost to the economy. Environmentalists claim the mine may pollute the Great Barrier Reef, while graziers fear it will spoil the underground water so crucial to their farms. Just as controversial is the prospect of a loan of up to $1 billion backed by the Australian government to finance the project. The Adani Group and its billionaire chairman Gautam Adani were little known in Australia before the mine proposal. In India, the company is a dominant player in the economy, with interests in ports, power stations, mining, real estate and food production. It's also been dogged by controversy, including allegations of environmental destruction, money laundering and bribery. Reporter Stephen Long and producer Wayne Harley travelled to India to investigate.
I feel sick because Adani is heartless.
They have flouted all possible regulations. They have their compliance has been pathetic.
Stanislas Correa is 6 years old. He's struggling to breathe. There's coal dust in his lungs.
We close the windows that the dust doesn't come in. Even then, my younger son, Stanislas, gets up in the morning and vomits all cold out.
He vomits up
Yes, coal.
The Correa's oldest son, Sherwin, has also been plagued by ill health from coal pollution.
As a young boy, I used to get these repeated, cold, running nose and all that. And my parents had to take me again and again to the hospital. I still suffer even today, and my classmates are suffering.
The minute we went out of town, might be Kerala, Delhi, they were perfectly normal within 2 days. On our return back, within 2 days, it would start again.
The Correa family live in Vasco da Gama, a city built around one major industry, a port. The giant Indian conglomerate Adani has a large coal berth here.
I would call coal as the curse on Vasco, because it is the pollution, the air pollution has been so rampant. There are so many people who have been facing health problems.
Adani's coal berth is not the only one or the only cause of Vasco's poor air quality. But Adani has had a running battle with the pollution watchdog since it began operating nearly 4 years ago.
The Pollution Control Board issued a show cause notice as to why Adani's operation should not be shut down.
The sick children's father, Savio, happens to be an environmental lawyer.
They have now passed an order.
He's been collecting evidence on Adani's pollution and its violations of licence conditions at the port.
On 14 occasions out of 24, the values of particulate matter exceeded the permissible limits.
And wow, that's quite a lot.
Absolutely.
The well-to-do of They can go out of Vasco, they can build flats out, but what about the poor?
In a rundown district of Vasco, Dr. Barban runs a busy hospital and general practice. Each day he treats the sick, the poor and the victims of airborne pollution.
In my practice, I find at least 22 to 25% of the patients who come are with the respiratory disease, high number. And this goes from adult, middle this thing, to children. And children who are suffering are badly suffering.
Adani denies that it's polluting the air. But just 2 months ago, a report by the State Pollution Control Board found otherwise. The report said that emissions of tiny toxic particles were consistently high in the port area, with highest levels in berth 5A and berth 7. Berth 7 is Adani's operation.
Coal is the one which particles remain and they go and stick in the lung air cells. It is like smoking a cigarette. In a death of a cell which takes place in the lungs, in a tissue, is permanent damage.
2 years ago, the Pollution Control Board ordered that mounds of coal be no more than 5 metres high. Adani refused, saying this wouldn't be economic or practical. When we were there, some of the coal was piled higher than a 15-metre fence, designed to stop the dust blowing into town.
I have seen from my own experience coal being stacked up to 12 meters at Adani's port regularly.
For this family, it's not just a debate on rules and regulations. It's about the health of their children.
It feels me very bad to see him suffer. As a mother, I have no words to say how bad I feel for the child. And if I feel bad for my child, there are so many mothers who also feel bad for their children.
In slick videos, Adani presents itself as a model corporate citizen, in keeping with its size and status. For in its home country, the Adani Group is a corporate colossus.
He's the biggest generator of electricity in the private sector, both coal-based as well as solar energy. He's the biggest importer of coal, much of it from Indonesia. He's also the biggest miner of coal within India.
I think it's a very, very interesting story. Here was a business person who very few people knew about him 15 years ago, 20 years ago.
Paranjoy Gua Tarkurta is renowned in India, an economist, author, investigative journalist, commentator and public intellectual.
And I find it really fascinating that here is a person who nobody knew 15 or 20 years ago, whose rise has been truly meteoric and who, sort of in some more ways than one kind of epitomizes the working of the nexus between big business and politics.
He's completing a book on Gautam Adani and his business empire.
Today he's not just one of India's richest men, he controls key sectors. Mr. Adani's conglomerate, directly, indirectly, controls the activities of 11 ports located along the east coast and the west coast of India.
At more than one of those ports, the Adani Group has allegedly behaved in a manner entirely inconsistent with its corporate rhetoric. It's a 3-hour drive from Vasco da Gama in Goa, across the border to the southern Indian state of Karnataka, and on to the port town of Belakeri. Today, Belakeri's a sleepy little fishing village, but look closely and you'll find the rusty remnants of an iron ore loading facility, once operated by Adani. Here, in 2010, the Adani Group's role in one of the biggest scandals in India's recent history was exposed.
An otherwise minor port on the coast of Karnataka, Belakeri, tossed into headlines as it emerges as the centre of what could be the biggest mining scam in the country.
7 years on, it stands as an ugly reflection on corruption and greed. This is what remains of Adani's port at Belakeri, clearly derelict now, but in its heyday, the heart of a massive illegal operation. Nearly 8 million tonnes of iron ore was illegally mined, then illegally shipped out of the port here, much of it through Adani's terminal. A report on the affair called the iron ore export scam a mafia-type operation.
The report was prepared by the People's Ombudsman, the Lokayukta, Justice Santosh Hegde, which documented how various private firms and private groups, including the Adanis, just about broke every law of the country, from laws pertaining to preservation of the environment, to customs duties, to local taxes, to export rules.
We are truly living through India's Gilded Age. What we saw in the United States or anywhere else in the world, it's being repeated here all over again. We have these robber barons who thrive on extraction industries.
Author and journalist Josie Joseph has spent his career exposing corruption. He's examined the Belakeri port scam.
The detailed report by the Anti-Corruption Ombudsman of Southern State of Karnataka is one of the most compelling and the finest documentation of corruption in this country that independent India has ever seen. There are pages after pages of documentation of how Adani Enterprises was involved in letting miners illegally export thousands and thousands of tons of iron ore from India abroad. And there are detailed documentation and tabulation of bribes paid at various levels and how it was all manipulated.
According to the report, records seized from the Belakeri office of Adani Enterprises show that it systematically bribed a host of regulators, public officials and politicians. The Ombudsman's report detailed the corrupt payments. Money has been regularly paid to port authorities, customs authorities, the police department, mines and geology, and even to MLAs and MPs. All these payments were not shown in the balance sheet of the company, unaccounted and paid in cash.
It was just unprecedented, the way in which honest officers were not allowed to function, how the corrupt prevailed.
No charges were laid against Adani Enterprises after a subsequent criminal investigation, and Adani denies any wrongdoing.
We did not pay bribes, and there is no reason for us, there is no rationale for us as a service provider to pay bribes to export illegally mined iron ore.
But the Ombudsman stands by the allegations in the report. The seized records show that all up between 2004 and 2008, Adani paid the equivalent of more than $500,000 Australian dollars in bribes. And that was before the illegal operation really ramped up. In a poor rural area, that's an astounding amount of money. What does that tell you about the ethics of the Adani Group?
What this clearly indicates is that here is a business conglomerate who will not stop at anything to maximize its profits.
Nearly 10,000 kilometres from Belakeri in outback Queensland lies the Galilee Basin. It's here Adani wants to build the world's biggest export coal mine. Licensed to extract 60 million tonne a year. Adani Enterprises, which was named in the Belakeri scandal, is the ultimate owner of the planned Carmichael mine.
Our father came here at the end of 1946 and lived here until he died a few years back. And my mother's family, they come from the property to the north, and they came in the 1870s.
That cow, Keely, she had a little baby calf. I just thought she was just fat. I was going to send her to the meatworks. You remember how many?
The Hollingsworths own a big cattle station nearby. They're among many landholders affected.
water's evaporating like anything. It's sort of stopped there for a while, but air's gone real dry again.
Yeah. Empty cart water up to Meridian if it goes dry.
Yeah.
It's a short drive across the Hollingsworth property to the high ground that overlooks the Galilee Basin.
The mine is on the other side of that ridge over there, about 30 kilometres away.
Out here, water is precious. The state government's granted Adani unlimited access to groundwater for 60 years, and the mine's impact will be massive. So what sort of area are we talking about?
Oh, it'd have to be thousands of square miles.
Thousands of square miles with the underground water affected?
Yes.
34 landholders have been told Adani's mine could diminish their water supply.
They told us that it'll lower our bore levels by about 20 centimetres, and the amount of water that we can pump out of the bores will be less, and they're not really certain of what the effect on the water quality will be, because the water will be flowing through rock faster and it could dissolve minerals and salts into the water.
One of our bores is already too salty for a human to drink. Cattle can use it. If that did happen, well, that bore may become useless. There might still be enough water there for the stock to drink, but too dangerous for them to drink it.
Adani is offering affected graziers agreements that say it will fix or make good any loss of water. They would have to prove Adani was responsible for the water loss.
The thing with underground water is that once you affect the stream's flow through the ground, especially with a mine, then that's forever. Like when the mine's finished and there's a hole in the ground left, those bores won't come back up. So it's a permanent impact on the entire area.
You can't live without food and water. If there's no water, there's no life. There's no food, there's no life. You can't eat coal.
Grazier Bruce Curry's property is south of the Adani mine. He's been fighting plans for coal mining in the region for years because of concerns about its impact on groundwater.
The Galilee Basin is part of the feed into the Great Artesian Basin, and when you consider that the Great Artesian Basin is like the Barrier Reef, it's an international icon. For us as stewards of that asset to sit back and let someone that's got such a destructive environmental record free access to that international icon is just inconceivable. Like, how could anyone in my generation stand up with any degree of pride and accept that? You know, we should be ashamed.
6 months ago, Curry travelled with a delegation of conservationists to Adani's home state of Gujarat.
I spent a week looking at the Adani operation, the impacts, and what I saw is just devastating. To talk to, I think I spoke to representatives of about 8,000 fishermen. There was about 4,000 primary producers and about the same of small-scale salt harvesters. And nowhere did I get a positive report about the impacts on their livelihood.
For Adani, the Mundra port in Gujarat is its showcase development, the largest port in India. If you believe Adani, its environmental record is impeccable.
Adani is recently recognized as a green port.
But on the ground in Mundra, there's plenty who'll tell you that Adani's conduct is anything but clean and green.
In Mundra, I think the farmers have very clearly complained that the water has gotten
saline and they're unable to use water on their farmlands. The fishing community, of course, it has been impacted. They've complained of fish catch going down, they've complained of access issues, some of them have moved away. So we've got these papers, finally. So there are about 4 or 5 such files that have come in.
Kanchi Kohli works for the Centre for Policy Research. She travelled to Mundra to work with local villagers on what's known as a ground truthing exercise.
The idea was to basically look at the conditions of the environmental approval and see whether they've been met or not.
Their report documented multiple breaches of Adani's environmental approval.
The approval said mangroves should not be destroyed while the port is being constructed. There was massive destruction of mangroves. The approval condition said that sand dunes should not be destroyed. They were destroyed. Creeks should not be filled up. Creeks had been blocked and filled up. Access to the fishing vessels to their fishing harbours into the sea should not be cordoned off. That had happened. So these were very clear, obvious violations that people could document themselves, that were visible on the ground.
The Environment Ministry in its show cause notice questioned Mundra Port on its large-scale reclamation of creeks using dredged material, destroying mangroves and constructing a township, airport and hospital without a coastal clearance.
Jairam Ramesh, an older statesman of India's Congress Party, was Environment Minister at the time. He commissioned a separate report by an expert committee.
The report found not accidental violations, but it found willful violations, deliberate violations, and also very worrisome. What it found was an attempt made to actually gloss over the environmental impact and minimize what was clearly a major environmental impact.
Adani denies that it was responsible for the ecological destruction and violations in the port of Mundra.
See, I would rather believe a committee that had gone, it had independent men and women of proven integrity, credentials. They went, they talked to people, they saw what was happening, and they gave a detailed report.
It's hard to believe that the only player in the area since the early 2000s who's doing massive port and railways development in the area is not responsible for this, because there is no other player.
So the denials are absurd.
Yes, it is.
The state's highest court found even more extensive breaches. It ruled the entire area had been developed without any environmental approval from the national government. What kind of development are we talking about?
2 or 3 ports, individual petrochemical units, other units that were all operating within the special economic zone. All of them were technically operating without individual approvals, as well as the entire special economic zone having an approval.
A port? A petrochemical plant?
Yeah.
I understand an airport and a township developed without any environmental approval. That's amazing.
Yes, it is.
South of Mundra is the Hazira port at Surat. Here, India's National Green Tribunal found that Adani once again carried out illegal work. Undaunted by an absence of environmental clearance or coastal regulation zone clearance, and without care for any adverse order or adverse impact on environment. It said Adani's irresponsible attitude must be deprecated and issued a $5 million fine. Adani Group disputes the rulings on Mundra and Hazira, and it's appealed against the decisions in India's Supreme Court.
The Adani Group's track record on environmental management within the country leaves a lot to be desired.
We went to Gujarat to see for ourselves. In Mundra, Adani dug up this common land used by graziers for its port development. Graziers told us about a spate of stillbirths among the cows and buffalo. They blame fly ash from Adani's coal-fired power plant for contaminating the land. We didn't get to see much else. Not long after, we were confronted by Adani security and told to leave.
So are you in Mundra?
Back at the hotel, things escalated.
Can you tell me who is this person who sent the email?
Our translator, myself, and producer Wayne Harley were summoned to the foyer.
Right. Who are the gentlemen that want to see us? Who are you? Wait. Who are you? Who are you?
We are police.
Right. I see your identification, please. Huh? Mr. Jadeja?
Yes.
Righto. And you are from any particular branch?
Crime branch.
Crime branch?
Yes.
And why does the crime branch want to see us?
Some formalities.
Our crime branch interrogation lasted on and off for about 5 hours, gradually ramping up as the police took calls and writing instructions from someone.
They got a call at the crime branch.
There was no point staying. We'd been promised a crime branch entourage the next day, killing our prospects of filming with local people. We left for the airport at 4 a.m. Police had warned us officers from 3 intelligence agencies would be arriving to see us if we stayed. It's 10 hours since we left Mundra. We're back in Delhi, but we've already made the local press in Gujarat. This article from the Friend of Kutch newspaper we've had translated from Gujarati, and it describes our suspicious activities, our high-tech equipment, and how the police triumphed over the Australian journalists. It said police had come to know that we were there to produce and broadcast a video against Adani Group's project in Australia, but were doing so without any permission from port authorities or the Adani Group. The 16 gigabytes of footage from such videography was deleted by police. What do you think of what happened to us in Mundra?
It's frightening, but it's a reality. It's a reality that the robber barons of our times have and will continue to use all kinds of intimidatory techniques, whether it's physical, whether it's using the state machinery, and that has been the case with investigative journalists, activists, and other kind of people who stand up and question these business houses.
Australian politicians have received a friendlier reception. In recent years, a cavalcade of federal and state MPs have enjoyed the hospitality of Gautam Adani. Their trips have cost the taxpayer more than $300,000.
Thank you.
Yeah. Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, a vocal Adani backer, is the latest to make the pilgrimage.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful. This way, Premier. Thank you. Premier. Hello, Premier.
Stephen Long from Four Corners. Can I talk to you about Adani and the evidence of bribery and corruption?
I'm about to go into a caucus.
Have you read the report of the Ombudsman from Karnataka?
No, happy to have a look at it for you.
I think you should.
Yeah, happy to.
Have you seen the evidence of the shell companies they've set up linked to tax havens?
What I do know about Adani is it means thousands of jobs for regional Queenslanders, and I welcome you to go up there and talk to regional Queenslanders.
10,000 jobs when the Land Court has written to your government
you should go up there and talk to the people who have lost their jobs and they're hurting. And regional Queensland is hurting, and we will do everything we can to get people back into work.
Why are you giving them false promise by saying 10,000 jobs when the evidence says otherwise and the court has said that?
What does Adani mean to Queensland? A fresh stake in the global economy.
The claim that Adani's Queensland mining venture will create 10,000 extra jobs is one of its key selling points.
Adani means 10,000 jobs for Queensland workers, from young apprentices through to older skilled workers. Adani is proud to build a long-term future with Queensland.
The state's Land Court told the Queensland government that the net jobs gain would be less than 1,500 nationwide. But needing to win North Queensland seats in a coming state election, the Premier has preferred to adopt Adani's spin.
Yeah, and how many jobs are going to be done by Adani? How many are offered?
Regional
That is absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish.
Did you know it's not just the direct workers who benefit from Adani's mining, rail and port investments in the Galilee Basin?
If you believe Adani and the federal and state governments, the North Queensland mine will also result in a revenue bonanza.
And these local resource, rail and port operations will see $22 billion worth of royalties and taxes reinvested into Queensland.
Adani's record in India leaves a lot of room for doubt.
This is Adani.
The managing director of the Adani Group, Mr. Rajesh Adani, who's been arrested by the CBI in Goa for alleged non-payment of customs duty. Let's go across to...
The Adani Group faces multiple allegations of tax dodging, financial malpractice and financial crime.
In the last few years, there have been a number of show cause notices issued by the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, which is the investigative wing of the Department of Revenue in the Ministry of Finance. And the DRI suspects that there was trade-based money laundering.
Adani Group companies head the list of those under investigation for an alleged coal import scam. A customs alert said the objective appeared to be twofold: profiting at the expense of consumers and siphoning off money abroad.
We found that they had been over-invoicing the coal imports to India by round-tripping them and routing them through a number of shell companies which were also owned by them and which were located in tax havens, etc.
Prasad Bhusyan is a public interest lawyer who's taken several cases against Adani companies.
The modus operandi is the same, that you set up shell companies essentially in tax havens, and through them you over-invoice either the import of coal or equipment in order to firstly cheat the Indian tax authorities, etc., and secondly cheat the shareholders of their own companies.
He's recently commenced a High Court case demanding action against Adani Group. In your opinion, these are financial crimes, criminal offences?
Yes, they are financial crimes. They are crimes under the Indian Penal Code. They are crimes under the various financial laws of India.
And the only reason they haven't been convicted in most cases is, in your view, political protection?
Yes, that appears to be the case.
In 2014, authorities documented an alleged scam involving equipment imports, with a money trail across the globe. Adani companies in India bought equipment from China and South Korea. The goods went straight to India, but the invoices went via a tax-free zone in the United Arab Emirates, where a middle company added a huge markup. That money, totalling nearly $1 billion, was siphoned off to Mauritius, a notorious tax haven.
They appear to be crooks. From all this evidence that the Department of Revenue Intelligence has unearthed, they clearly appear to be crooks.
Crooks is a strong word.
Yes, it is, but unfortunately that's the only word that can be used in these circumstances.
Vinod Adani, Gautam Adani's older brother, controls the companies that shifted the money to Mauritius.
Mr. Vinod Adani, also known as Vinod Shantilal Adani, also known as Vinod Shantilal Shah, is in charge of the overseas operations of the Adani Group, with dozens of companies, not only in Hong Kong and Dubai and Indonesia, but in many tax havens, treasure islands.
Investigating officers accused Vinod Adani, along with Adani companies, of executing a planned conspiracy of siphoning off foreign exchange abroad and trade-based money laundering. Adani Group denies this. It told authorities that Vinod Adani, or Vinod Shah, is a non-resident Indian having permanent residency in Singapore, who was not at all having any involvement in any Adani group of companies.
It's absurd to say that Vinod Adani is totally independent of Gautam Adani when the two of them have ownership structures that are clearly connected in Singapore and through the Cayman Islands and through multiple business dealings. To suggest that they're independent businessmen when they are brothers and they've been working together and they're major shareholders in the whole Adani Enterprises vehicle is absurd.
But in late August, another official said the power equipment case against Adani should be quashed and set aside, accepting Adani's assurances it had done nothing wrong. That finding is being challenged in Delhi's High Court.
To say the least, the order looks slightly bizarre and absurd. The order has been issued by the authority without listening to the very investigating team that has done the investigations. It's a one-sided order.
The investigations have big implications for Australia. Australia's Abbott Point coal terminal is owned in tax havens via private companies controlled by Vinod Adani, aka Vinod Shah.
I think there is a national security issue here. It is one of our biggest ports. It's owned in this opaque structure through multiple tax havens. The sole director in Singapore is Vinod Shah, and Vinod Shah is under multiple corruption and tax fraud inquiries by the Indian government, and yet here we are with a port, one of the biggest ports in Australia, controlled by Vinod Shah.
Adani has an extraordinarily murky and complex corporate structure in order to conduct what, in a way, is really quite a simple series of projects in Australia.
Adam Walters has been piecing together Adani's opaque web. His research shows potentially billions of dollars from the Carmichael mine could be siphoned off to tax havens via companies controlled by Vinod Adani. Adani's planned railway is the conduit.
So there's $2 a tonne payment from the mine into one of those railway trusts, and they can skin it either way. They can shift that money via Singapore to the Cayman Islands, or it can be shifted directly to the British Virgin Islands. Yes, Adani has put in place a structure which allows them to take any profits that are made on the rail project in Australia and directly distribute them to the notorious tax haven of the British Virgin Islands. Yeah, this murky structure.
Yet the Commonwealth and Queensland governments want a federal government fund, the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility, to finance the railway with a loan of up to $1 billion.
So we know they've got a $2. If I was the Australian government and I was considering giving a $1 billion loan to enable a rail project, I would be very concerned by what appears to be a corporate structure that is designed to maximise profits in tax havens and has as a sole director of the intermediate companies somebody who has been under investigations for very serious financial offences in India.
Josh Frydenberg, good morning, welcome.
Nice to be with you, Barry.
Do you think the Adani mine will ever go ahead?
I do, and the Carmichael project.
In Australia, we're told the coal from Adani's Carmichael mine will free millions of people in India from energy poverty.
It will help lift hundreds of millions of people out of energy poverty, not just in India, but right across the world.
You know, the Australian politicians are obviously not properly briefed by their officers about the viability of Adani coal.
EAS Sama used to be India's most powerful energy bureaucrat. He's analysed the economics of Adani's planned Carmichael mine.
My assessment is that by the time the Adani coal leaves the Australian coast, the cost of it will be roughly about $90 per tonne. We cannot afford that. It is so expensive. My assessment is that it will not be possible for the Indian consumer, the Indian market to absorb Adani coal.
Adani's Mundra power plant is meant to take coal from the Australian mine, but it's hemorrhaging money. Adani's trying to offload it for next to nothing.
The Mundra power plant has been put up for sale by Adani Power's management this year for ₹1. They've acknowledged the power plant is financially distressed, it's loss-making, it's been losing money for 6 years, and the power plant is unviable, and Adani management have acknowledged that.
That's 2 cents. ₹1 is 2 cents.
2 cents, a $5 billion power plant. It is the largest import coal-fired power plant in the world, and it is clearly unviable.
Adani's Abbott Point coal terminal in Queensland is also facing serious financial challenges. It's saddled with extreme debt, more than Adani paid for the terminal.
I've never seen a corporate structure like this in 30 years of financial analysis. So both the port and the mine have massive negative equity. I've never seen a corporate structure so focused on debt with so little equity, or in fact negative equity everywhere you look.
In the next year, Adani needs to refinance $1.4 billion in debt for the port, and more than $2 billion by 2020. It's struggling. Adani's Carmichael mine has been shunned for finance by banks worldwide. Unless Adani can make the mine happen, its entire Australian foray may be a house of cards.
Adani has damaged the value of his port in trying to free up port capacity for the mine. So if the mine does not go ahead, Abbott Point is actual collateral damage, and the damage is very significant.
Absolutely. It's a reciprocal relationship. If the mine doesn't go ahead, the port can't be refinanced, and the mine can't go ahead without the port. And this explains, I believe, why we are seeing such a personal connection to the Australian projects and such intense lobbying from the chairman of the Adani Group for the Australian projects to go ahead, because he is personally, financially dependent upon those projects. And indeed, if they do go ahead, he stands to make potentially billions of dollars of profits in Caribbean tax havens from them doing so.
In far outback Queensland, this small exploration camp is the only sign so far of Adani's Carmichael mine.
It might not look like much now, but Adani reckons that work on the giant mine here is going to begin within weeks. The extraordinary thing is that despite the evidence of bribery and corruption, the shell companies linked to tax havens, the allegations of fraud and money laundering, the state and federal governments are bending over backwards to accommodate Adani's every need.
Good to see you. Terrific. Very, very good. Thank you.
Australia's Trade Minister Steve Chobo met Gautam Adani in Delhi in August.
My starting point with respect to opportunities around collaboration and the importance of certainty for investment is critical.
Within weeks, he announced a rule change that for the first time lets a government agency, the Export Finance Investment Corporation or EFIC, fund domestic mining projects.
Make no mistake, I am absolutely committed to broadening and deepening the trade and investment relationship between India and Australia.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
The change opens the way for the government to make EFIC either partly bankroll Adani or guarantee loans from private banks.
I think this is an act of desperation by our federal government. Adani's Carmichael project is not bankable by private financial institutions. We've seen every major bank in Australia rule out financing. We've seen major insurance companies rule out financing. We've seen offshore banks rule out financing. It will only get financed if the federal government provides a massive taxpayer subsidy.
Watching on from Delhi, India's former Environment Minister can't believe what he is seeing.
Ultimately, it's the sovereign decision of the Australian government, the federal government and the state government. But public money is involved. And more than public money, natural resources are involved. I'm very, very surprised that the Australian government, for whatever reason, has seen it fit to all along handhold Mr. Adani. So my message to the Australian government would certainly be, please demonstrate that you have done more homework than has been the case so far.
Four Corners has been requesting an interview with the Adani Group for several weeks. We received no response until late last week when Head Office sent a statement denying all allegations of wrongdoing and saying Adani Group is an absolute and religiously law-abiding organisation. The statement is on our website. Next week, we investigate the unfolding scandal over the chemical contamination of water supplies in Australian communities. See you then.